Hello students, here is Professor Pliny Monteiro, and in this video I'm going to explain the country level segmentation and how you screen these different countries to make a fine decision of some countries to further analyze in terms of market. And how can you develop your country segmentation? Basically, with these variables that you selected, you can use two approaches to create the segments. The first one is named the a priori approach. In that case, you're going to create groups of countries based on the variables and some criteria. For instance, suppose that you're going to divide the countries in terms of technological adoption, and you pick up the information of technological adoption, for instance, in the country competitiveness index, and then you're going to create groups and say that if a country is in a scale between 1 and 7, if it's greater than 6, you're going to consider a country with high level of technological adoption. And countries between, let me say, 3 and 6 will be like countries in average in terms of technological adoption. And countries with less than 3 will be considered countries with a low level of technological adoption. And then you have this first category, and then you can create many other categories to join your groups. For instance, you can have a second variable that will be like the GDP per capita, and you can use that to create like wealthy countries, like average and mid-income countries, and low-income countries. And then mixing these two variables, you're going to have 9 segments of countries. And then you can put the categories of each country in each of these 9 options when you merge these two variables with 3 options in each. This is very good. It's very easy to do. You can do this in Excel. You don't need a lot of technological skills. And then you can create other categories of countries that you're planning to operate. In the post hoc approach, basically you're going to use some technique like cluster analysis or CHIDE, and these techniques you're going to select many variables that are relevant for your business, and then you're going to see which variables are the ones that will create the group of countries that are really homogeneous in terms of their variables. But when you compare different clusters, these clusters are very different in terms of these variables. And also, these techniques will show you what will be the number of clusters that you have. So you can, depending on the analysis, you can have 3 clusters of countries or 4 clusters of countries. And you can use that. Of course, this is very sophisticated. You need to know a lot of advanced statistics to use that. But then you can use that to have to select the variables that are really relevant, and also to define the number of clusters when you think about countries. After that, you're going to start the third step, that is the screening process of these countries. Basically, this step will start with a general analysis that is named preliminary screening. Basically, you're going to look to some external criteria, just criteria in the countries, and usually some political and economical factors of the countries that you have in the world. And in the second stage, you can have a fine-grained screening. And the idea is to make a funnel. So basically, in the first stage, so the stage 3.1, you're going to have basically all countries in the world, and each of them will belong to one segment. And in the stage 3.1, you're going to make analysis of some countries, and not all countries in the world. And maybe the case that after that you're going to have like 10 countries or 15 countries or 20 countries, not much more than that. And in the finely graded screening, you're going to join in this analysis the firm competitive power in these countries that you select. In that case, you're going to have this small group of countries, like 15 or 20 countries or 10 countries, and making analysis of how your firm are able to compete in each of these countries, then you're going to finish this stage with a list of very few countries, like 5 countries, 6 countries. Very hard to have more than 10 countries after that. And for making the preliminary screening, one tool that is very common and very interesting for doing that is the index named the BERI index, the Business Environment Risk Index. And what is this technique? BERI index is an index created by a consulting company, and they have many different specialists that will make the analysis of all countries in the world in all these dimensions in this table. So basically we have the first dimension is political stability, the second is economic growth, and so on. And each of these factors will have a weight to calculate the index. And political stability will have an importance of 3, economic growth 2.5, and so on. And to each factor in this list, these specialists will give rates between 0 and 4. And when they do so, 4 means the best one, the best approach that you can have, and 0 means that the worst scenario that you have. Once you multiply these weights by the rating, then you have the overall BERI index if you sum up these multiplications. And when you do that, basically you're going to have an index of how this country, how the environment of this country is good for business. And for instance, if you have, according to the company, if you have more than 80 points, you have a very favorable environment for investors. And if you have a number between 70 and 79, it's not so favorable, and so on with these different levels. Of course, if you want to have access to the real BERI index, you need to pay a lot of money for this consulting firm. But this, you can do your own BERI index. Of course, you don't. When you buy this report from the BERI index, they will have a full definition and a lot of assumptions and data that are the basis for creating this analysis. Since if you are not going to buy it from the company, it's very expensive indeed, you can do it by yourself. But of course, for doing that, you need to look to the history of the country, look to the political environment, and really need to look to the current affairs in each of these countries that you're going to analyze before you start doing making your assessment and then calculating the BERI index. But of course, you can do it by yourself, and the results will not be the same as a professional making a specialized analysis of that. But okay, you can use that for having a general idea based on your knowledge and the knowledge of your team. Let's look to an example of the Business Environment Risk Index in Brazil. Basically, I pick up the criteria from BERI Index and I gave myself the rating to Brazil. So basically, it's not the real BERI Index, it's just my opinion on the current affairs in Brazil. So, for example, in a scale between 0 and 4, I gave assessment of 2 to the political stability. And economic growth, I'm using 0, and so on. So basically, when I multiply the weights by the rating, for instance, 3 multiplied by 2 will be 6. 2.5 multiplied by 0 will be 0. 2.5 multiplied by 2 will be 5. And then, if I sum up these multiplications, I'll have a BERI index of 53. This is not a good scenario for foreign investors. And this means that in terms of the BERI index, in my opinion, Brazil is not well positioned. Of course, you can try to do this index for different countries in the world, working with your team and working with your staff in a given business. After looking to the external environment, then you're going to use also the internal factors of the firm to make the fine graded screening. So the idea here is to make a deeper look in the country and also look how you can use your competitive advantage to have superior performance in a given country. So the main idea here is to use what you call the market attractiveness and competitive strength matrix. This is basically a McKinsey matrix or a GEGA, General Electric matrix. And this tool will help managers to identify international opportunities by plotting countries according to main dimensions. First one is the market or country attractiveness, basically related to country-specific conditions that can increase the potential or represent risks for the business. And you can have the competitive strength, the second dimension, that is related to the firm actual or potential advantage in a related market. Let's look to an example of some factors that you can select for market or country attractiveness and the competitive strength. For instance, in terms of market and country attractiveness, you can have the market size, you can have the market growth, the buying power of customers. If you have a lot of fluctuation in the market seasons, if you have the average industry margin, competitive conditions like concentration, intensity of competition, the entry barriers, some conditions that can create limitations for foreign business operating in the country, like the tariff and no tariff, the barriers or import restrictions. Also, the government regulations can create a lot of difficulties or can make it easy for you to operate there. The infrastructure to make your business run in the country properly. And also the economical and political stability. And finally, the physical distance between home country and host country. And competitive strength is basically the factors that are inside the firm. So there are internal factors of the firm, like what's the market share that you have, that your company have. And if you have a huge market share, of course, you have more power when you enter into a new market. And the marketing capability and capacity, like if you know how to make business in that country, if your product fits to the demand of that market, the price that you can achieve in that market compared to competitors, your contribution margin compared to competitors, your brand image compared to other competitors, your technological position, product quality, how your market function is able to support your operations in that country. And finally, the quality of distributors and service that you can develop in that country. And finally, some other factors like financial resources and access to distribution channels in that country. Just to make an example, one very important factor here when you try to analyze the competitive strength is the market size. Not the competitive strength, but the market country competitiveness. And one interesting thing that you can use information from imports and exports in that country to have the theoretical market size. So basically you have this information, I think that the World Bank and the World Trade Organization have information about that, so you can go to their website and look to what is the level of imports and exports in each category of product. And if you pick up the production, assume the import and subtract the exports, you have the theoretical market size inside that country. And of course, you need to make some adjustment in the stock size, but it's not so easy to get this information. And then you have the effective market size. But if you want to have the information of the market size in a given country, you just need to go to usually to the economic minister, and then you have information on the production in that country. And then you go to the World Trade Organization and pick up the imports and exports of this product in that country. So production plus imports less than exports, it's the real size, is the theoretical size of the market in that country. If you have additional information about stock, the change in the stock size in that country, then you have the effective market size. With these factors, you're going to make an assessment and also define the importance of all these factors to represent the competitive strength that you can achieve in each country, and now that will be plotted in the horizontal axis of this graph, and in the vertical axis you're going to plot the market country attractiveness. And of course you need to make assessment of the attractiveness of the country in each of these factors, and also have one estimate of the importance of these factors. When you do so, when you do that, then you can plot in a graph what the results of this matrix. So C countries are basically countries where you have a lot of competitive strengths, but the country is not so attractive. And in these countries, usually the strategy is to make some harvest, or you're going to make a diversification of your investments, or you can usually give away your business to other companies to operate, and then you can receive a fee upon that. The big countries, you have more selectivity in your strategies, and it's very common here to use some kind of joint venture to increase your competitive strengths in that country, since you have some attractiveness in their markets. And usually here, or you're going to give up from these countries, or you're going to invest and try to dominate. So in that case, basically you try, or you're going to say, okay, I'm going to look to more attractive countries. I have a lot of more attractive countries where I have a lot of competitive strengths, or I'm going to give up from that and let other business to help me doing this, for instance, using a joint venture. And A countries are basically countries where you have a lot of competitive strengths and the market is very attractive. In that countries, you're going to invest more of your business. Usually, you're going to you're trying to search some countries here where you can have a lot of competitive advantages and a very attractive market. With this map, then you can make a selection, and then after using that, you're going to select some few countries for your operations. And what are the characteristics of these three categories of countries? So in countries A, basically you're going to have your best opportunities and look for a long-term strategic development. And usually here, company try to have a permanent presence, and you're going to use a lot of investments, research and development to really dominate these markets. In big countries, usually you have some opportunities, but you have usually some risks in terms of politics or the economic scenario. And because of that, it's not so easy to make long-term commitments. And in that case, you're going to enter, but you need to make a more profound analysis of the risk. And finally, C countries are countries with a very high risk. Usually you're going to allocate just a few resources there, and usually you're going to have just a short-term orientations in these countries, and usually companies do not have a real commitment with that, and sometimes they're going to give up from these countries if some problems occur. And how can you reach these numbers? Usually you're going to make a list of the factors, for instance, for market attractiveness, and then you're going to make assessment of each country that you're analyzing in terms of their attractiveness. And for instance, 1 can mean very poor and 5 can mean very good scenario. And for all factors that you selected, you're going to select a weight, importance factors, usually in terms of a percentage. And what will be the result of your market attractiveness? You're going to pick up the number, like the assessment that you gave here, multiplied by the importance in terms of a percentage. For instance, suppose that I have market size with 20% of importance, and I'm giving to Brazil a very good assessment in terms of market size. So if I multiply 5 by 20%, it will be like 1. So the result will be 1. And then I will do the same for the other factors that I selected, and I will sum up everything. And the result will be a number between 1 and 5. 5 meaning that the general market attractiveness is very good, and 1 is means that the market attractiveness is very poor. Of course, you need to do the same for the competitive strength. In that case, you're going to select factors that you believe that are important for defining your competitive strength in these countries. And for each of these factors, you're going to make assessment and also to establish a percentage of importance. And then you're going to make the same multiplication and sum up all the results to finally have your index of competitive strength. And this is one example. Suppose that I pick up 4 factors, I pick up 3 different countries, and I have now 4 factors for market attractiveness. And I give these importance weights for each of these factors as determinants of market attractiveness. For instance, political stability is very important. In second place, infrastructure, and then GDP growth, and finally market size. And for this business that I'm analyzing, I will give assessment of the market attractiveness of each country in these dimensions. For instance, 5 for market size in Brazil, 2 for France, and 2 for Germany, and so on. If I multiply all these weights by the assessments and sum up all the results, I'm going to have the market attractiveness index of Brazil will be 2, and for France will be 3.5, and for Germany will be 4.10. Then I will make the same estimate for the competitive strength. So looking to the firms, I selected 4 factors like market share, product quality, networks, and financial assets, and I give these levels of importance. And for each country, I give assessment of how these factors are able to give me competitive advantages in each of these countries. So my market share will allow me to have a huge level of competitive strength in Brazil. Because of that, I'm using a number of 4. And then, after making the assessment of all dimensions for all countries, I'll make the multiplications. 0.10 multiplied by 4, 0.4, 0.8, 0.4, and then I'll have the final result. For Brazil will be 2.8, and so on for other countries. And after that, I'm going to have a general table to represent the result. In that case, I'm going to represent each country as a circle, and I'm using the population size as the circle size. So I'm putting bigger countries with a bigger size in the graph, and then I have the result like that. So Brazil, big population, but I will not develop a lot of competitive strengths, and the country is not so attractive. And Germany, we have a lot of attractiveness, and I can develop a lot of competitive advantages there. And France is something like in the middle, where I have some market attractiveness, and I have like something like in the middle in terms of competitive strength. With this, I finished the presentation on the steps of creating the segment of countries and making the screening of these countries to have a few list of countries to look then to the profile of customers. And this will be the content of the next videos. See you then. Bye.